So welcome to Alberta Wilderness Association and our wonderful home. This is the Heritage Building. It is Hillhurst Cottage School. It was designed to look like other houses in the community. And we're very proud to be stewards of this historic building. I just have a couple of things in advance that I want to mention before we get into the introduction. So I don't know if all of you are aware, but Alberta Wilderness Association runs an adventures program, and we have a couple of adventures coming up. I just wanted to highlight. So on this Sunday, there's a Carsland Canal hike, and this is where you'll learn about irrigation and why I would say probably tens or hundreds of thousands of fish die every year that are caught up in the canals, and what we can do about it. And then on September 25th, which is Wednesday evening, Glenbow and Husking Parks tour with Jeremy Farkas to see what will be flooded if they actually go ahead and build the Bull River Dam. So if you have any interest in that, please register online and join those upcoming things. I just want to thank all the staff and our one board member that's here in person today, so Jim, and the staff that are here this evening. We really enjoy having the opportunity to meet with members and interested public. So thank you. And thanks to all of you for coming to support Dale Leckie's book talk. So Dale Leckie has an MSc in geography and a PhD in geology from McMaster University. And he did his undergraduate BSc in geography from the University of Alberta. He is a professional geologist who has worked as a scientist at the Geological Survey of Canada and a chief geologist at a large energy company, which we will not name. He has edited numerous books and published more than 100 papers, many on the geology of Western Canada. He was an adjunct professor in the geosciences department at the University of Calgary, now retired. Have we retired?
Yeah.
Dale has been president of the Society for Sedimentary Geology, and a Canadian Society of Petroleum Geologists, where he is also an honorary member. And he has been awarded numerous awards from several geological societies and has been leading geological field trips in Western Canada throughout his career. And he is also the author of at least 3 books. Maybe more, I don't know. These are the 3 I could find. Rocks, Ridges, and Rivers, Geological Wonders of Banff, Yoho, and Jasper National Parks. The Scenic Geology of Alberta, which was recommended to me when I first moved here, and I smartly got him to sign it for me before all of you arrived. So. And then his new book, Wildlife, Landscapes, and Geology, which explores the relationship between wildlife and landscapes. So I would like to welcome Dale Leckie for this evening.
Thank you very much, Deborah. It's great to see everybody here. All friends and I'll say spouses and friends as well. It's really good. So thank you. So what I'd like to do today is talk about wildlife, landscapes. I got to stand still. If I move around, tell me. Not like I dance when I get up on the stage. Wildlife, landscapes, and geology, exploring connections. So basically, it's a summary of what I put in the book. Take a look at this landscape that we've got here. It's Wildlife on Acrylic by Dean Francis, lives in southern Saskatchewan. And what's the premise for wildlife, landscapes, and geology? What am I going to do? Why did I do this? Well, take a look at that beautiful, deeply entrenched river valley. And what have you got there? From a geological, geomorphological, geographical perspective, you can see that there would be sand dunes up on top. There are glacial lake deposits and glacial till in the top right. Badlands. There's a meandering river with a river and pool. It's a deep valley up call them entrenched river valleys. And then there's cottonwood forests. We're going to talk a fair amount about cottonwood forests in Western Canada. So what's that got to do with wildlife? Well, there's certain types of wildlife that live in each of those environments, those geologically controlled environments. Up on the sand dunes, kangaroo rats. On the prairies of Alberta, on the glacial lake sediments, those flat surfaces. You get bison, pronghorn antelope, burrowing owls, snowy owls. You look at the river and what do? You get lake sturgeon in there. And ripples and pools where the sturgeons lay their eggs and where the young fry go downstream to hang out for the winter with their parents. Cottonwood forests, that's where you get all sorts of birds. Birds is how I describe it. And in the Badlands topography, prairie rattlesnakes and other reptiles. What we're going to do today is talk about rugged mountain cliffs and safe places. We're going to talk about wildlife in the dry rolling prairies. And we're going to look at the rivers crossing the prairies, deep valleys, cottonwood forests, and prairie oases. And I truly believe that these river valleys are prairie oases. Rugged mountain cliffs and safe places. We'll start there and we'll go there. You can see these rugged mountains. This is our Banff, Jasper, Yoho, Waterton. You're all so familiar with. And when you look at them, one thing that you should realize is those mountains are not being formed anymore. They quit being formed about 60 million years ago. Like tectonics and moving around, volcanoes and that. They're eroding. They've been eroding to take the shape that we see for the last 60 million years. And if you want to put some technical names to some of those features that you see there, well, eroding mountain is not a technical name. You can the cliffs, but you've got glacial cirques to the right, end moraine at the end of it, debris flows, alluvial fans, big boulders coming off those cliffs, rock falls, talus slopes, and that all contributes to provide habitat for wildlife in the mountains. In this instance, mountain goats. Those steep rugged cliffs provide habitat for protection from wildlife, but we can't see mountain goats unless we're pretty intrepid hikers in that. So I'll show you where you can see them. And again, geological controls. I mentioned that the mountains are eroding. If you go into Jasper, Jonas Creek rock slide is called. Well, about 500 to 1,000 years ago, there was a rock slide. And let go, just like that. And the debris from the rock slide is in the river valley. It's crossed the highway. The highway's been built across all that debris. And so you've got eroding mountains providing habitat for American pika or hoary marmots. So you're seeing steep rugged cliffs where we get goats and mountain sheep, bighorn sheep, but we also see in the debris from those cliffs, it creates habitat. So let's look at some of the animals now. Mountain goat and lake bottom trees. Like I said, to get up there and see mountain goats, you got to get into some pretty rugged terrain. But there are places to go see mountain goats in our Rocky Mountains. So if you want to see mountain goats, where should you go? Well, check out the local geology first. So the habitat for mountain goats is the remnants of those eroding mountains that we've mentioned, and they live in the most rugged terrain that we've got in the country, all of Canada. But we want to see them in more easily accessible places, and that's where I refer to glacial lake beds, where they go for their minerals. So mountain goats require mineral nutrients, just like we do. They will travel considerable distances, quite often at great risk to themselves from predators, to get to those minerals that they require in their diet. So where are you going to go? Where can you see it? You can go to Mount Kirkeston Goat Lake, Jasper National Park, along the Athabasca River. And you can see the Highway 93 there. You can see the Mayette River here on the left. And you can see Mount Kirkeston Goat Lake is labeled there. 12,000 years ago, the glaciers were starting to melt. They were well into melting mode. And lots of runoff was coming off. Lots of melt hitting us, rivers draining the lakes. There was a valley glacier that went down through the Mayette River, Jasper there, and it blocked and it created a dam in front of the Athabasca River Valley. And that was became what I call Glacial Lake Crestline. And it filled with glacial flour. All those melting, all those eroding glaciers scour at the bottom of the ice. You get this pulverized limestone, siltstone, clay material, and that's what gives you that white water. The white water is filled with what we call glacial flour. That flowed into the lakes, and it was deposited on the lake bottoms. So the glaciers were eroding. They were eroding limestones and dolomites. And that's where those mineral nutrients came from: phosphorus, sodium, sulfur, and countless other ones that the goats are eating. You go to Mount Kesson Goat Lick, that's what it looks like. You can see the Athabasca River. There's a bench of that silt that's about 9 meters thick, and you can see off in the distance the bottom of the lake. It's a flat terrace. It looks like a terrace. That's the flat lake bottom from Glacier Lake Kesson. So for each of the animals, I talk about the geology, wrap up each of the animals with the geology and the mountain. This is the only one I'm going to walk you through the summary, but they're all like that. This would be a bit redundant. So, but it shows you the premise that I used for looking at these animals. So where's their habitat? How does geology relate to mountain goat habitat? First of all, they live in the remnants of those eroding mountains. Tens of millions of years of erosion gave us the steep, craggy terrain, which provides protection from predators for the goats. They need mineral nutrients, that's the glacial flour, and so they go and get that from glacial lake beds. In the book, I include art by Sergio Gaetan. That's digital art that he's done on the computer or iDevice or a tablet, as well as landscape scenery. American pika, mountain debris. Where do they live? Pika live right close to tree line. They don't live necessarily in those eroding mountains, but in the debris that's coming down from the mountains. So basically close to tree line, and they want to be close to mountain meadows. Come on in. There's a chair here, if you want. They need those meadows close to that eroding mountain. The eroding mountain for protection, and they need the meadows, obviously, for nutrition. So an interesting thing about the pika is they migrated to North America 500,000 years ago. They came from Siberia, most likely. The name pika originates from the Tungus people, the Tunguses people of Siberia, which is kind of interesting. And they came to North America at a time when sea level was low. And so Alaska and Russia were connected through a land bridge. And that's what I'm showing in that little inset. Sea level was low because of glaciations. Whenever you get glaciations around the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, it takes the water out of the ice, takes the water out of the oceans, sea level falls, and we had the Bering Land Bridge where these animals could migrate. They are farmers. They harvest hay all summer long for their winter nutrition. They do not hibernate. They live under the snow and in the rocks there. So they harvest that snow, the hay crops, whatever vegetation happens to be there, and there's a stored hay crop in the rocks. And they'll eat that all winter long. And so geology in America, we'll review it. You can see my argument where I'm going with it. Soaring golden eagles, mountain thrush sheets. I think this is kind of a neat story. Everybody loves the golden eagle. So every spring and every fall, the eagles migrate. They come from their, in the spring, they come from their southern winter habitat. They fly north to Alaska, to the Yukon territories, and they migrate along the eastern Rocky Mountains, what I've got shown there in yellow. And they migrate for thousands of kilometers. They're one of, not the, but one of the largest birds in North America. A wingspan of about 2 meters. Think how big they are. Think how much energy they have to expend when they're flying thousands of kilometers. So they take advantage of the geology for their migration. Go to Jasper, and what you see are the mountain ranges there. They've been deeply buried, 60 million years of erosion to give you the shape that we've got now. And you can see the mountain ranges. Each of those is a thrush sheet, and they dip to the west. to the southwest like this. The prevailing winds come from the west and the southwest. You go to Banff and you can see the same thing from Mount Narquois. Look at those mountain ranges dipping in a westerly direction. And you know where that is. You can see Banff right through there. And they dip into the prevailing winds. So what happens here is a cross section topography in the Mount Lorette area, Kananaskis country. The prevailing winds come down the lee slope. They rise up. They up those, I'll say that west dipping slope of Mount Lorette. And so the eagles take advantage of that for creating uplift. So they can migrate, expending minimal energy for those long routes. If you want to go see golden eagles, and now it's getting close to golden eagle time. October, November, they'll be migrating southwards. And so up and down the mountains, you want to be in the easternmost ranges, easternmost mountains of the main ranges, of the front ranges, sorry. So you want to be in Turtle Mountain area. You want to be in Roche Mayette, east of Jasper, the town of Jasper. You want to be in Kananaskis country. And that's where you can go and watch migrating eagles. So it's great to see them. So geology and golden eagle, there's the relationship I'm looking at. Let's leave the mountains and let's go into the prairies. Let's look at the wildlife of the dry rolling prairies. Sundial Butte, southeast Alberta. And I describe the prairies as being in a rain shadow. We're in the rain shadow of the Rocky Mountains. Our normal precipitation system, our wind systems, are we get these westerly winds again coming from the Pacific Ocean, Vancouver Island, west of Vancouver Island. They're very, very moisture laden. The winds rise up, mountain ranges, all through British Columbia. They lose their winds, or they lose their moisture. They lose the moisture and precipitate. And so as a result, by the time they get to the eastern Rocky Mountains, just west of Calgary, west of Edmonton, they're very, very dry. Dry air descends and goes across the prairies. And that contributes to the dryness we see in the prairies. The prairies are all located in this rain shadow. Here is Police Outpost Provincial Park down in southwest. And you can see Chief Mountain just across the border into Montana. You can see where you're coming from, vegetated. In front of you at the bottom of the slide, we're starting to get drier. And you see that when you look at a Google Earth image. You can see that area, the light green area of the prairies. That's where the rain shadow is. And that's where the grasslands, Alberta, Saskatchewan grasslands happen to be. North of the grasslands, we get a little bit more precipitation and it's cooler. You got the parkland, more trees there. That aridity, the dryness, promotes the growth of short and mid-height grasses. And that's what we see across the native grasslands across much of Alberta and Saskatchewan. Now, an interesting thing is these prairies in this range probably been around for 40 million years at least. We know that from rocks that we find in southern Saskatchewan, southern Alberta. The chemistry of some of the teeth that we find tells it was very dry. And in Montana, just across the border, they found fossil soils that are 43 million years old and were formed under very dry conditions. We had giant turtles running around southern Alberta. They were about this high. In southern Alberta, southern Saskatchewan, they could not withstand freezing. So warm and dry for a long time. And a lot of animals have evolved over millions of years to thrive and to live in the semi-arid grasslands in the rain shadow. And the rain shadow is there because of the mountains. There's my geology relationship. So what about some of the animals that live there besides the pronghorn antelope? The Ord's kangaroo rat. And the theme here is Ord's kangaroo rat, drained lakes, and active sand dunes. Great Sandhills Ecological Reserve, southwest Saskatchewan, or you could go to Empress, and in the Empress area in eastern Alberta. And so where the Orange kangaroo rat lives are in sand dunes like this in the semi-arid plains. So why do we have the sand dunes? When the glaciers were melting, the ice was receding 12,000 years ago, we had big lakes being formed in front of the ice. Those lakes drained as the ice melted back, and the strong winds, here's the wind story again, the prevailing winds formed sand dunes in a lot of places across both provinces, across the prairies and the parklands. What you see in blue there is the distribution of all of those old glacial lakes across Alberta and Saskatchewan. Almost 50% of the province was covered by these large glacial lakes. Those lakes create important habitat besides for the sand dunes. And then that map shows where all the sand dunes are. And you can just pick your favorite area. Some to the northeast of Calgary. You can see the Empress area. These are the sand dunes in through here. The Great Sand Dunes. There's more sand dunes in Alberta than most people realize. And we're talking about the orange kangaroo rat. So they're found in southeast Alberta, southwest Saskatchewan, in that area shown in the blue color, and on those sand dunes. That's where you're going to find them. So there's habitat here, again, the Great Sandhills Ecological Reserve, it's western Saskatchewan. If you take a look at orange kangaroo rat, it's got its name because of its big feet and its long tail. It moves just like a kangaroo. When you see a video of them jumping around, it's talking like a kangaroo. You go look for them, they only come out at night. And if it's a full moon, there's a strong chance they're not going to come out because there's too much light even then. So they only come out at night. But you might get lucky if you go walking around the sand dunes, and there's on the right hand, you can see a dwelling place, a burrow on the left. On the right hand side, you can see footprints from where he was hopping along. You can also see what I've highlighted in that long yellow line is his tail, dragging his tail. You find those and you start looking. So let's just take a little digression from the orange kangaroo rat. And we're going to talk very briefly about one aspect, prairie rattlesnakes. Prairie rattlesnakes love orange kangaroo rats. The reason I paused there is that CBC was interviewing me, and one of the interviews, the regular host was not there, so they had another host in there. Jenny Howe, everybody knows Jenny Howe. Jenny Howe said, Dale, don't say the word, most people know who Jenny Howe is. Don't say the word snakes, because whatever her name is, the host will just freeze up and go paranoid. She's absolutely afraid of snakes. That was a digression. Anyways, orange kangaroo rats and prairie rattlesnakes. So prairie rattlesnakes love the orange kangaroo rat. The interesting thing about the orange kangaroo rat is that it harvests seeds to store in its den, and it puts it in its fur-lined pouches that it's got in its mouth there. When a rattlesnake catches a rat at night, doesn't matter when, but it'll be at night because that's when the rat's out. Basically, the snake cannot digest cellulose. It'll digest everything else, all the rest of the kangaroo rat, or much of the meat in the kangaroo rat. But the cellulose is not digested. So those seeds will pass through the snake. And then when the snake gets rid of the carcass through its back end, the seeds go with it. But the interesting thing is that some of the seeds will germinate within the snake because of the moisture, the wetness within the snake's digestive system. So it's just, I found this really interesting. That's why I talk about it. It's another way for seeds to be dispersed in the prairies. That snake may have traveled tens of kilometers in 2 weeks' time from the time it first got that kangaroo rat. Geology and kangaroo rat. This is Dean Francis's painting of the Great Sandhills in Saskatchewan, where all the dunes are vegetated. Burrowing owls in treeless grassland. Everybody loves owls, big ones and small ones. So let's take a look at burrowing owl habitat. First of all, it's in the rain shadow of the Rocky Mountains again. They're in eroding, you find them in eroding badlands, you find them in rolling glaciated terrain and on old lake beds. They inhabit places where there's minimal tall vegetation. And they don't want tall vegetation there because they can't see their prey and they can't see predators coming to get them. They love to live in prairie, in black-tailed prairie dogs. They will also live in the pre-existing burrows of ground squirrels, gophers, badgers, coyotes, and foxes. So what they'll do is they'll take over a burrow and they lay their nest, the eggs hatch and they rear their young. And preferred colonies are where the black-tailed prairie dogs are. An interesting thing about the burrowing owl, if it's in the nest, the predator comes along, it will often make a sound like a prairie rattlesnake to scare the predator off. When I hear of adaptations like that, I just think it's so neat, so interesting. They require open area with short, somewhat tall grasses. They eat mice, voles, and grasshoppers. And they'll move from the burrows maybe up to 2 kilometers. And they need the open space, as I said, to watch for predators. This is from Grasslands National Park. There's the relationship between geology and burrowing owls. Pronghorn antelope and broad open prairies. Remember, we're talking about the prairies in the rain shadow of the Rocky Mountains again. So the habitat for pronghorn antelope, wide open spaces, gently rolling ground moraine, old glacial lake beds, as well as we're in the rain shadow. Story, that's the theme to the prairies, the rain shadow. Interesting thing about pronghorn antelope is their eyes. They're so big and they're set far back on their skull so that they can see movement kilometers. So they're living on the open prairies. They got great visibility. They can see predators coming up to 5 kilometers away, and that's a powerful defense mechanism for them. They are the fastest animal in North America. They can go up, they can do a dash, a burst speed of almost 100 kilometers an hour. And they evolved over millions of years to be able to do that, to be able to outrun the now extinct American cheetah, American lions. We used to have lions all through the prairies, as well as dire wolves. And they're now extinct. So there's the relationship between geology and pronghorn antelope. Flat, low-lying terrain where they can see long distance. Greater shorthorn lizard, horny toads, and eroding badlands. The greater shorthorn lizard, if you ever used to watch old Western movies, they quite often be talking about horny toads. And that's what these are. They're about 8 to 10 centimeters long. They blend in, they camouflage very, very well with their landscape. Found in southeastern Alberta, in the Badlands, southwestern Saskatchewan in the Badlands as well. Their diet is primarily ants and grasshoppers. You can see how well he blends in his gray color with the gray between the lichens there. It's what we call a sit and wait predator. It's camouflaged so well that it's almost fearless. It sits there and it waits for ants to come in front of its wing. It's up in front of it, and then it'll dash up and run. Habitat, eroding badlands, all across southern Alberta, south-facing slope, and it avoids really heavily vegetated areas. Here's my wife looking for greater shorthorn lizard in grasslands. Here we are again. This is my wife and somebody else near in the Manyberries area, and south-facing slopes like this, as well as juniper patches like that. Likes juniper because it can get into the juniper if it gets really hot. If it gets too hot, it needs shade, and juniper provides ideal habitat for them. The greater shorthorn lizard, as I said, eats ants and grasshoppers. Here's some of its scats, and you can see it's you can see the grasshopper leg and other parts of the grasshoppers in there. It also eats ants. And so ants have uric acid in them, and the digestive system of the greater shorthorn lizard can't handle that uric acid, so it expels the uric acid. That's what that white cap is on top of the scat. It's basically uric acid that was pushed out with the waste material. We're not going to really talk about the loggerhead shrike directly, but indirectly. Loggerhead shrike and other shrikes, they're the only carnivorous songbirds that we've got. So they're a songbird, but they are carnivorous. They don't have a big claw, a raptor claw, like an eagle does, like a kestrel does, to hold on to its prey. So it's adapted to do something else. So what it will do is the loggerhead shrike will catch its prey, greater short-horned lizards like this, and it'll skewer them onto, in this instance, it's a hawthorn branch. You'll see them on barbed wire bars. And it does it, is storing them for future consumption, for, let's say, for a rainy day, but he's also to impress the females with his hunting abilities, supposedly. I found that a little bit interesting. Geology in the greater short-horned lizard. I won't repeat them, but you can see the relationship. You can see the argument I'm making. Let's leave the part of the prairies. Let's leave the prairies in a different way, but let's go into entrenched rivers that cross the prairies. Meandering rivers, cottonwood forests, and prairie oases. During the last ice age, during the last glaciation, and every one before, we're just interested here in the last one, North America was just about all covered with ice. Calgary, there was 2 kilometers of ice above us. If you've been to Edmonton, there was 4 kilometers. It was really, really thick. All that ice was really heavy. So as a result, pushed down the Earth's crust, made it sink, and the mantle flowed away. Then kilometers of ice across North America melted. When it melted, the weight was, so the mantle started flowing back in, molten rocks, and the crust rebounded up. We have rivers flowing across the prairies, and the landscape, the prairies are lifting up like this, but the rivers will down cut and give us deep valleys. That's what I'm showing in the bottom. That's a cross section showing the topography of the landscape in part of central Alberta, south central Alberta. And you can see those deeply entrenched river valleys, the Red Deer River, the South Saskatchewan River. And the South Saskatchewan shows up a couple of times because it meanders, winds across the prairies. So we've got these rivers that are deeply entrenched into the prairie landscape. Take a look at a Google Earth image. And first of all, just look at that landscape. And a word that comes to mind when you look at it, you don't see a lot of green. It's very, very dry. The only place you see green are in those cottonwood forests in the river valley. That was the last slide, that's the Red Deer River flowing into Dinosaur. If you go into southern Alberta, there's the South Saskatchewan River flowing into the Red Deer River valley. And again, it just looks so dry. But where's the only green that you find? It's in those river valleys. So they're really important for the ecology of a lot of animals, mostly birds, a lot of other animals. These cottonwood forests only cover about 1% of the prairies. That covers an area of about 500 square kilometers. Not really very big, but area-wise, percentage-wise, what do they look like? Here's Dinosaur Provincial Park, and many of you have been there. And you can see the forest in the river at the bottoms of the river valleys. As that river meanders side to side on the point bars, we get these trees growing. The cottonwood forests. You go to Milk River Canyon in deep southeast Alberta, probably one of the more spectacular places in the province. And there's a cottonwood forest growing there along the Milk River in the canyon. Red Deer River Valley, north of Trochu, and you can see the cottonwood forest lining the river valley. So we've got the valley, we've got the big valley. So every year, because of rainfall and snow melt, water levels. Every 5 to 10 years, we get floods in the river valleys. This wasn't a big one, but you can see the dirty water. You can see the foam there. You can see this was a big flood, June 2013, South Saskatchewan River, and you can see how far the water went up on the point bar, on the little park, Police Point Park. And this is important because when the rivers flood, they erode and then they deposit sediment. At the same time as the river is flooding, and then after the river floods, the water levels drop, the water levels fall. But at the same time, June or so, that's when the cottonwoods disperse their seeds. There's billions upon billions of seeds there. And they need a fresh seed bed to germinate. They need fresh sand, silt, or clay to grow on. And we get that along the riverbanks that I'm showing there, that sandbar with newly deposited sediment. For the trees to grow, it's got to be newly deposited sediment. That sediment's got to stay wet for about a week for the seeds to start germinating and start sending out roots. You can see some of that freshly deposited seed bed along a couple of the rivers there, one in a Google Earth image and another just from a riverbank. And that's where the seeds will germinate, the new trees will start to grow. And those cottonwood forests provide great prairie habitat. Here you've got I'm going to say 20-meter high, 15-20-meter high cottonwood trees, creating the overstory. You can see the dense understory, and you can see the wet area in the swales between. Ideal habitat. In the Dinosaur Provincial Park area, up to 130 species, bird species have been reported. 64 species nest there. You can go to each of the different river valleys and get numbers like that. It's so important. It's so important. It's habitat across the prairies. You do not get those kind of numbers when you get up on the prairies. You get different birds, different animals in there, but just the density is amazing. Also, that was an American goldfinch. There's a spotted powie up in the tree. Gold snakes. Gold snakes love this environment too, because they climb trees and they'll go after nest the eggs of various birds or the fledgling or the young birds. And so again, they're part of the. Here's a porcupine eating fresh, tender hawthorn leaves. This one's in writing on stone. There's a relationship between geology, entrenched rivers, and the cottonwood forest. And I've just gone through that with you. Creates great habitat. What else do we see in the entrenched river valleys, in the deep river valleys? We see western painted turtle. Most people don't realize we've got turtles in Western Canada. The only place they grow and live naturally in Alberta is in the Milk River drainage. You'll find them in other places, Banff, Edmonton, Lethbridge, but it's where people have taken them, let them loose. They have pets, decided they didn't want to keep them any longer, and it's rather than flushing them down the toilet, they took them to the local pond or to the local river. Their habitat is slow-moving waters with sandy or muddy bottoms, meandering rivers, oxbow lakes, marshes. If you want to see western painted turtles, go to Elizabeth Hall wetlands in Lethbridge. You will see them for sure. They are there by the hundreds, probably. They are up to plate size, dinner plate size. And they were introduced at some point, and they've taken over the Point Bar or the Oxbow Lake that's there. So this is the natural area, Milk River, but we find them across different places in Alberta, Saskatchewan. Many of the ones in Saskatchewan, that's their natural habitat. So wildlife, landscape, and geology. My argument, my premise has been knowing a little bit of geology helps you discover wildlife and spectacular landscapes. My argument, or not argument, what I always sign my books as is get out and explore. That's all I'm trying to do is encourage people to get out and explore, understand the natural history that we've got in our two provinces. So what's in the book? Wildlife, landscapes, and geology. Well, I've got lots of maps, just lots and lots of maps, telling people where they can go to explore. This is one of them. Highway 41, Highway 36 are probably some of the best highways in the prairies. And then you can do one from Waterton Lakes all the way up to Jasper to see the mountain terrain. So in the book, you pick an area and I describe in summary a lot of the animals and birds that you can see. And that southeast, I'm not going to read these, golden eagle, burrowing owl, greater shorthorn lizard, mountain plover. Plover is pretty hard to see. I just put that in the book to get people out looking for them. The chances of finding them are pretty slim, but they might be. Also, you're going to see different animals at different times of the year. I try to help people out with that, when they might see them. You go to Banff, the Cave and Basin National Historic Site, and you might see, you go look for the Banff Spring snail. And there's a geological story there that I'm not going to talk about now, but you see them mostly in the late fall, winter, and early spring for various reasons. I do not talk about the conservation status of the animals, because that's a different story in itself. But for each of the animals, do put their conservation status. So greater short-horn lizard is at risk. So I just label it up front, so people are aware of I'll say the risk to the various animals. Lots of maps, like I said, where you can go see the different animals, fish, birds. I put the range and occurrence of the different animals. And I'm a geologist, so for each of those animals, I talk about geology of the animal, like we've done today. I include landscape art, the art of Dean Francis. He lives just east of Empress, Alberta, in Saskatchewan, north of Leader. And he graciously put a lot of pictures into the book. Sergio Gaetan, he designed the book, but we've got a lot of his wildlife art there. So at that, I'd like to thank you very much for your time. I'd like to thank the photographers and the artists who put their works into the book as well. Now I'm good for questions. I'm a little bit hard of hearing, so you'll see me wandering close to you.
Maybe I just make a comment. I've known Dale for years, okay, because we both worked in the oil patch. And the geologist, and so Dale. And what Dale sort of distinguished himself was early on in his career, he was working full time in the oil patch. Well, she wasn't serving Canada and whatever. But he was publishing all his papers, and so he'd always been publishing papers and leading field trips. And then he was president of the Canadian Society of Petroleum Geologists. He was president of the Society of
Sedimentary Geology.
Sedimentary Geology, which is American. And so, and at the same time, he was also father to a growing family of 2 boys, right? So how did he do it? Well, he's a classic example of how behind every successful man, there's a woman. And it partly is because his wife, Mary, was always really supportive of what he was doing. And you would have seen she's in one of these slides. So also when he's doing this investigation, all this research, she was there.
He was always with me.
And so his books are a real team effort. It isn't just Dale, it's also so kudos to Dale and kudos to Merrick.
Thank you very much, Dave. I appreciate that. Any other questions, comments? That's great.
So I was just wondering where you get your ideas for your books, like if this was a little bit outside of, I guess, normal, or like most geologists don't really worry about wildlife. But yeah, I'm just wondering where you got the idea for it.
Well, that's a great question. So I consider myself a naturalist. I consider geology to be one aspect of natural history, like trees, plants, birds, and geology is just one component. So when researching the first 2 books, we started seeing, again, it's my wife, Marilyn, and I, we started seeing these relationships. Certain animals kept cropping up time and time again in certain environments, certain settings. And that was kind of the seed for this. And then I started doing the research, and I, basically doing the research. I said, oh, that animal, not all animals, not all birds, not all reptiles, their habitat is controlled by geology. Keep that in mind. I just talked about the ones that there is that close relationship, or what I consider a close relationship. So it was based on us wandering the prairies, wandering the mountains, and just seeing the animals kind of always in certain things. Some of it was 30 years of 40 years, ever since my geography degree, looking at animals, their biogeography and those relationships. Somebody goes back to my roots, undergrad days. So hopefully I answered the question.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Peter.
In my wanderings along rivers mostly, when they explore the bottomland, how concerned should you be that you step on some private land? There's a fence, let's say, but on the other side of the fence, there's something you want to see. The way I do it, I just step over it, look at it and come back. Now, the gun laws are different here than in the States, so I think I'm okay. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, you're probably okay, and I think we all have to have our own comfort zone. I don't trespass. I don't knowingly trespass. If there's a sign, I'm not gonna go across that for sure. If there's a fence, I'm gonna presume some farmer, some rancher owns it, I'm not gonna do it. I'm not preaching other people do that, but that's my philosophy. Wherever we were this last weekend, there's some neat places I wanted to see, and I wasn't gonna go over the line. And that would even, I still don't understand the law, crown land, crown property, that we maybe should have access to, but we don't always. Road allowances, we're supposed to be able to go up and down road allowances and wherever you want, but you're gonna find road allowances in the prairies that are fenced off and that say no trespassing. I do know that sometimes landowners can buy those rights, to the road allowance. I don't understand how they do it. So my philosophy is I do not knowingly trespass. And that's just me.
Comment on that,
Of course.
being a rancher. If you ask, most times we will let you in. We're happy to have people take pictures and stuff. Crime rate is very high. So having people on our land that we don't know is somewhat upsetting. If you ask, you're more than likely gonna get permission, and then you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, good, very good point. Always ask if you want to go to that effort to get on.
In certain Alberta where you have non-posted land, there are vast stretches of land where nobody's living nearby, even though they may be privately owned, if they're not posted. Then I think you're allowed to have access.
Well, you have, but again, to me, the crown land access, to me, it's so vague. They're the custodians of the land. Whether they can legally throw you off, but they're the custodian of the crown land, and they may come and confront you because it's saying you're on, and I've heard of that, and I've talked to people about it.
Yeah.
When you go down to one, and you've got the great ranches down through there, that's posted, or sometimes it's posted, and sometimes it's not, but that's crown land.
Yeah, so yeah, there's a little bit of clarification, right? So there's crown land that people have their grazing leases on.
Yes.
And then there's private land.
Yeah.
They're very different things. But the crown land, I can't remember how they say in the legislation, right? It's people are allowed reasonable access. So again, right, on foot, it's reasonable access, but again, they say to contact the leaseholder. And again, usually what you have to do is make a phone call. You can like find the name of the leaseholder.
But it's not as easy as that, because quite often you have to find the leaseholder. So that means in these areas, you have to have the municipal lands, the maps. and
There's
stuff.
the website
Yeah.
online and it's like,
Oh,
Yeah.
oil and gas people have it. Because.
And just so you know-
And say, hey, maybe.
Deborah,
And just so you know, we are having the president of the Alberta Grazing Leaseholders Association give a talk later this year. And then in the spring, we will have someone from enforcement come and explain public land access and how we do that. So those are two talks that are coming up. So because it has been very vague and very confusing for a lot of people, we thought these would be helpful discussions to have.
and also our adventures often go to these places and then we do all that work. So,
I was just wondering, so the Rocky Mountains and the geological formation obviously have a pretty widespread impact on all the ecosystems past them. Is there any other formations in Canada that that you can think of that have such a impact on the various ecosystems?
well, I would say that, yeah, sure, the Rockies do this, it's become such a vast area. But the argument that I made about the entrenched river valleys, to me, that's just as profound.
Yeah.
And you could say about the prairies as an entity, you could do the same thing. If you want to go into the parkland to the north, I think it's a version of the same thing. Rockies, because they all cover vast areas.
Yeah.
You know, the entrenched river valleys with those cottonwood forests, like 1% of the prairies, but you know, they're so impressive. I think them all.
They're definitely like country above the weight. I guess I meant more like outside of like Alberta and Saskatchewan. Is there any other like formations that you know of that like, I guess the winds hit them one way and they're depositing rain another way and.
Well, you know, let's go to the Canadian Shield, up in Saskatchewan. That's an entity in itself. Go up to the high Arctic and we've got the permafrost and the tundra and the wildlife that lives, wildlife vegetation and the wildlife that lives there. So I'd say it's pretty, you just start
There's like
thinking.
many of them. Yes. Yeah, I was just wondering if, if there's one specific ones you could point to across the heaviest hitters for their influence in each province, but I guess they all kind of interact with each other.
No, I can't, but that doesn't mean it's not there. It's just because I can't answer your question. Yeah. I want to go back to Deborah's comment just a minute ago. She said, what inspires me for books? Well, I've written my 3 books. Scratching my head like you wouldn't believe, or people would be interested in. But you know, I've covered Alberta, Saskatchewan. BC is too complicated. It's hard. British Columbia, get people interested. All I'm interested in is getting books and to people. But scratching my head for my next one.
Here's the next one.
What's that?
I'm saying here's the next one.
Listen.
So wildlife habitat, wildlife distribution is impacted by these landscapes. Those landscapes are changing as climate changes. So they've been working on how those wildlife distributions may change under those influences using what we know today about distribution and landscape.
Just what's the last part?
So,
The last question.
you're as a geologist, you can talk about landscape
Yeah.
and how climate, microclimates.
Yeah.
Right? So as climate changes, wildlife distribution will change, and you can already see currently how wildlife is distributed
Yeah.
given the current landscape. So if climate dries, and be a more expansive, say, arid
Yeah.
areas, then you'd expect wildlife distributions to change.
Yes.
It seems plausible that you could make some predictions about those changes, knowing what we have to do.
Yeah, I think you could, but you could probably do it pretty easily. One of the things I've noticed over the last 3 or 4 years is pronghorn antelope. We're not supposed to see pronghorn antelope in central Alberta if you look at the range maps. But you go up the Viking, east of Edmonton almost, you can see the pronghorns. And there's other animals that are, they're migrating, they're moving. I don't see that as a bad thing. It's and in part maybe with the pronghorn, it's to do with changing climate. And we're seeing, I won't say the grasslands are expanding more. I've never read anything like that, but they're moving up there. I see them in that part of the area. We hear about birds, certain birds. I can't think of any off the top of my head. Actually, I can. Snow geese. When I talk about snow geese, and they migrate and they migrate and stop at our prairie potholes. All those, and we're snow geese. I won't call them just about extinct 10, 20 years ago. Now they're the most populous bird we've got supposedly in America. You know, when you go into the prairies, starting now or in the next couple of weeks, you'll find. Is it a flock of snow geese? I don't know what you call them.
Yeah, it's a
Flock of snow geese. Thousands upon thousands. Which is pretty neat to see. We're seeing different swans coming up. Cranes, I'm seeing more cranes, sandhill cranes, than we ever did before. They're just migrating, you know, a lot of them are just migrating through. And there was a report that some of you might know better than me, of a whooping crane somewhere.
I was wondering if the climate's getting more arid and hot. If the climate's getting more arid and hot, with things like the, what is it, the sage grouse? Will these sage might move further north, and there would be more possibility of having this sagebrush. Because at the moment, this is the northern limit, you know, it just comes into Alberta. Right? But if it dries up, this sage would move north.
But the thing with the problem with the sagebrush, will it dry enough? Will it dry enough and before the sagebrush goes extinct, Ruping?
No, they're not extinct for this.
No, but they're not. Well, that's true, but here, extirpated, yes.
I just have to say, sagebrush are super reliant on sagebrush.
Yes.
And unless that plant is
Migrates north.
able to expand further, which we've cultivated so much. of it.
Yeah.
And that's like, you really need that native grass.
What I'm saying is if it becomes more arid, people might stop cultivating.
Yeah, or the sage might actually
Or they
expand.
ask for more
They start
irrigation.
irrigating.
Yeah, that's a
No,
good,
but this, the water is brown. Another issue.
Talking about the incision of the rivers, I'm wondering whether the rate of incision has changed at all. I've heard a while ago about that the decimation of the beaver population meant that the rivers sped up, and so the rate of erosion increased, and that actually led to greater incision
so
in the valleys.
what you say is probably not this right. You know, I've heard versions of the same thing, but when the ice, so we had kilometers of ice above us, 2 here, 4 in Edmonton, things like that. Most of the incision would have occurred probably fairly soon after the ice melt. That would have been the highest rate uplift of those areas. Some of the prairies are still uplifting right now, because of the ice that melted and left us 12 to 15,000 years ago. So there's still some uplift. The decimation of the beavers, and from a geological perspective, you know, it's only been in the last 150 years that we've done that. And so I've heard the same thing as you, sort of because of the destruction of the dams, loss of the beavers, destruction of the dams, you're getting more, the rivers just go straight to more erosive. So I will agree with what you're saying. I don't think the rate would have changed geologically, you know, 150 years versus 15,000 years. So what I'm saying is ice melts, it melted so quickly over a few thousand years, and it just started coming up.
The rate would have been a lot more at that time.
At that time, that is correct. And then it slowed down gradually. And then maybe with the beavers, it increased a little, with the decimation of the beavers, it increased a little bit, but not what it would have been. Also, that's good enough.
You've spoken about the.
Hang on. That, I'm upper than a turnip.
You've spoken about the many stories that are kind of woven into this book. Your explorations across the like indigenous stories you've seen with the relationship between geology and biology.
No, not, I didn't do anything like that in this book. The second book, I did read indigenous stories in certain geological, certain places. You know, you go to the neutral hills. It's the three of the black used to fight, and then they signed a truce. They didn't sign a truce. They came to an agreement not to fight. It's the name neutral hills game. I did that in the second one. Didn't do anything like that. This one. I'm just thinking if I did it, if I thought or not. Hang on. Unless you got a strong voice.
My question is on the flooded river valley, you know, does that control the fish forms present in that region? Are there specific kind of fishes that are abundant, for example?
Yeah, so I talked about we've got a large fish called lake sturgeon. And they occur, I'll say, in the eastern part of the province, and they can be tall as I am, not quite as heavy as I am. And they lay their eggs. So I talk about riffles and pools. Riffles are really shallow waters, a little bit steeper, water flows faster, it gets well oxygenated. They lay their eggs, the lake sturgeon lay their eggs in riffles. There's no silt. And then after the eggs hatch, the young fry, they go downstream to the deeper pools and they feed and start to grow in the deep pools. So I think I'm answering your question. So there's examples. I just threw lake sturgeon in there. You can do a short version of that story for certain trout as well. You know, where you can, you know, where they're feeding, where they're laying their eggs. You know. So there is a relationship to fish habitat and aspects of the river. Meandering rivers.
So, the reason for the question is, I'm from Nigeria. And, you know, in Nigeria, where we recently studied the geology there for oil and gas resources. And if you go on the land, on the ground, find meandering rivers, possible days and all of this kind of stuff. I was kind of trying to marry this, talk, you know, with how that's gonna have controls on some of the fishing and the wildlife.
And so I think the same thing would apply, probably in the rivers in Nigeria. I don't know what you were talking about on the delta. Because on the delta, you know, you're also going to get the salt water coming in a certain distance too, and you're going to get certain species tied to where the salt water is. Salt water will get to a certain point, and then you just get the fresh water. But I don't know if the same involved in that. That's a good question. I think we're done.
Okay.
So thank you so much, Dale, for a wonderful talk. We'd like to give you these gifts. This is from Tea Traders and Mud Pottery. And one of our new tubes, which you can buy, they just arrived today for $18. And we're, thank you very much.
I'm doing a lot.